this is going to be for me it's the third of the three-part series in issues that come up in teaching Bereshit in yeshiva high schools. There's some talk. There's been some requests from some people to next week. Mrs. Canner is supposed to start to maybe take a week off because I think some schools are on vacation next week and it might be harder for childcare and things like that. So I'll speak to Mrs. Canner today, see if we can figure that out, and we will be in touch in the next day or so to figure out how to schedule things. Pass that over there. Thank you. Okay, so quick review, and then we'll get started. I think we should. Whereas in the past couple of weeks, I've had to run hard at the end to get everything in, or most of everything that I wanted to do. I'm pretty sure that we'll make this work this time. And here we go. That's from Dina. It should. I think we should be good. But let me tell you, this topic, talking about moral education and looking at Sefer Bereshit, looking at the lives of the Avot. It's something I've been thinking about for a long time. I started thinking about it a lot when I was in college, and I had a professor at YU in a Bible class at YU who was like the best class I ever took at YU. It was a professor who has since, not heard anything about him. He was a professor in the late 80s, early 90s at YU. His name was David Sykes. Anyone heard of David Sykes? Well, I'll tell you why I heard of David Sykes. At some point, I was wondering who he was. He wrote a dissertation at YU in the Bible department called Patterns in Genesis. He was a great teacher. He was really interesting. He talked a lot about things that took place in Sefer Bereshit. It was a great course in Bereshit that I took. It was a 2-semester course. Usually YU, I think Bible courses are 1 semester. It was a 2-semester. It was great. I never heard anything from the guy again. So I was like, after I graduated YU, I think he wasn't, as far as I understood, he wasn't offered tenure. And then that guy, and then things left. I Googled him this morning. I Googled him. It took a while to. Usually, you Google somebody's got like a name, you find them like. Well, it took me 5 minutes just to find him. He is a new age neo-Hasidic life coach living in Monroe, New York. Yeah. I mean, he was like this clean. He learned in more yeshivish places when he was young. He learned in like Lakewood. I think he learned in the Mir. He was at YU. He was this very he's a clean shaven kind of modern guy with him on the Jewish speakers bureau. He does scholar residence gigs as far as I learned this morning. He's got like a big long bushy beard, and he's like got the whole new age life coach Hasidic thing going on. But he was a great teacher. He was a brilliant guy. Got me really thinking about Bereshit in ways that I want to share with you a little bit this morning. Okay, one of the things that comes up when you're teaching Bereshit, besides we talked the past couple weeks about science, talked about archaeology, we talked about ancient Near Eastern texts, how that fits in with stories in Bereshit. But what I wanted to take a look at today is nothing external. That was all external stuff. That was science as being external, or we're looking at ancient text, external archaeology. But so I want to look internally in the Chumash today, and things that most of the traditional Farshim deal with. I want to figure out the best way to do it in high school. What I'm talking about is there seem to be some episodes in Chumash when you're learning that don't seem that the Avot or our heroes are models for behavior seem to do things that we would say, like, if our kids did that, we'd be angry at them, right, in some things, right? And give me some examples of things like that the Avot do. It seems a little bit like you have to explain. I mean, there are explanations, but when you look at it on face, it seems like,
I'm lying about Sarah, saying I'll say you're my sister.
Yeah, so that seems a bit odd. Let's just say, it seems odd. It doesn't seem like, doesn't seem perfect. Doesn't seem the type of thing that would be of high, advisable, moral character, or even strategic character, perhaps. Saying that's a good one. I'm saying that. That's the business that took place with, Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov and Esav. I have two parts of Yaakov and Esav's story, I guess. In the beginning of the parsha, in which Yaakov gets the birthright for pot of stew. And then at the end, where he's not tricking Asa, he's tricking his father. That's also seems funny, to say the least. Those are a couple things. Maybe we'll talk about that in a second. So, what I wanted to share with you basically, I want to share with you three different approaches. The first is I've done a couple times. The first two are like the first one I'm not so into. The second one I'm kind of into. And the third one I like a lot. I'll show you the three approaches. Now the first one is I'm going to show you. This is a translation of the Yiddish. The first one I want to show you. This is from Rabbi Kroll, who was the founder in Lakewood. Wrote this is from he wrote this in Europe in the 30s before he came to America. He wrote a very strongly worded article about the importance of making sure that when we talk about the avot, we're talking about the avot as spiritual paragons, as having no flaws. And I'm going to share with you just for a second what he says. This is I think this is J.J. Schachter himself may have been translating the Yiddish here, although I'm not 100% sure. It's taken from an article by J.J. Schachter. The Holy Forefathers, this is Rabbi Kroll's writing, Holy Forefathers, who were the most luminous, loftiest, and purest personalities, the holiest creatures, represent the foundation of eternal spiritual vitality, the wellsprings of chesed, and the full range of positive attributes for the entire world, for all mankind. Patriarchs are, in fact, held in highest esteem by every nation on earth, which is true, right? The worst enemies of the Jews did not dare tamper with their luminous and holy image. This is Rabbi Schachter going on to explain. Rabbi Cutler went on to insist that, quote, every Jew possessing a spark of faith to whom the honor of the Jewish people is dear is forbidden to allow such heretical writings to enter his home, and appealed to rabbis, Gaonim, Talmidei Chachamim, as well as the ordinary God-fearing Jews to protest this sacrilege as strongly as possible. So Rabbi Schachter is a good historian. So he goes, he's like, Rabbi Schachter is a shul rabbi, now as a professor at Yeshiva University. He's also a great historian. So when he sees Rabbi Cutler writing very strongly against this sacrilege, he's obviously responding to a specific incident. So he goes and looks through the Yiddish press in the 30s in Europe and finds what exactly he's referring to. So he's referring to this poem. This is another translation, just to get a sense as to what Rabbi Cutler was referring to. It's written by a Yiddishist poet. His name is Itzik Manger. He wrote in a publication called The Hunt. It was on March 29, 1935. Now you get a sense as to whether, how sacrilegious this is and what this was. This is clearly what Rabbi Cutler was referring to. He wrote a poem. He was a poet who was, involved in Jewish tradition, but was not the most traditional. And he liked writing his poetry about Jewish themes. So let's take a look at the poem. So he was talking. The dawn is blue at the window. 3 times the rooster crowed. Outside the horses neigh, impatient for the road. Hagar is worn with weeping. Her child lies in her arms. Once more she casts her eyes around the gray familiar room. Outside the wagon driver haggles with Abraham for his fare. Rav Avram, add a 6-piece. After all, there are 2 to haul. The pony scrapes the gravel as if it were saying, come on, give me a chance to show you how to make the highway tame. Cry not, dear Yishmael. Our portion is like this. This is how the patriarchs behave with long and pious beards. There he stands wearing a silken cap of Avram the pious Jew. Loyal mother, does he at least feel my bitter broken pain? And Hagar takes as a witness the heaven and the earth. This is how the patriarchs behave with their long and pious beards. Well, it's sharp. It's sharp. So this is, again, it's certainly irreverent. Certainly irreverent, and we're going to take a look. We're talking this more in a second. This is what Rabbi Kroll was referring to when saying that when you look at the avot, it's inappropriate to refer to this kind of behavior. Whether here what we're talking about, what this poet is referring to is when Abraham, listening to Sarah's suggestion, banished Hagar and Ishmael, and the poet is criticizing or chastising Abraham for that behavior. Now, perhaps it was, perhaps too irreverent, and that's what, it's unclear whether if he had said it in a little bit more reverential of a tone, but been a little more raising questions, whether it would have provoked the outrage of Ron Cutler in the way that it did. But just to get a sense as to what approach number one is going to be, it's looking at the avot as basically being, as I referred to them, as angels, as having no flaws. What might be some of the, I don't know, before I even look any further, what would be some of the problems that would come up with that sort of approach? You think it's educational in teaching kids, not as even like.
As angels?
Yeah, refer to all this as angels.
They're untouchable, and we're supposed to learn from them.
Yeah, that's one.
Sometimes it's high, it's
Yeah, that's one of the.
difficult to get to that
So in Rabbi J.J. Shafter's article that he was where this is quoted on the morality of the patriarchs, he published in 2006. He pointed out that was his critique of it. Was exactly as Seema said, which is when you put the avos as supermen, the risk of it is that there's nothing to learn from. In other words, if you look at somebody being so completely and wholly different than anything that we are familiar with, then the risk of that is that they are no longer relevant to any sort of lessons that we can learn. Oh, that was then, it's not us. Now, the other extreme, though, is also true. Like, you don't want to, on the other hand,
Make him everyday Joe.
yeah, just, regular guy, sit down and have a beer with Abraham at the bar, right? Talk about his marital problems. There are a lot of, there's been, I was reading another article just yesterday. I prepared this class, I was, for this class yesterday. You may know it's we had Shabbaton this weekend, we were in Orlando. I had the most delightful 3 hours yesterday. I don't know if you can appreciate this. We were in Epcot. My lap was Wi-Fi in Epcot, in case you're wondering. I was very tired. I brought with me my backpack and my laptop. I went over into France, overlooking a nice little man-made lagoon, sitting at a table with a little umbrella, had a cup of coffee, my computer, a chumash, and I downloaded a bunch of articles these things that are already on my laptop. I sat there for 3 hours uninterrupted, just thinking and reading, and it was like I could do this every Sunday. Yeah, it was like and the kids are walking and running, going soaring and all these little rides. I'm sitting there this is like heaven for me. So this is, as I was there yesterday, reading through some of this, there's a very interesting field of literature that's come around over the past couple hundred years since Freud was around, which they try to it's called psychohistories, in which this is it's not a Jewish field per se, but looking at you look at various people in history and try to understand them using with the psychological background, trying to incorporate that, not just historical records, but also looking at their decisions and their behavior and trying to get a sense as to who they were from a psychological perspective. So there's a lot of people have done similar things in Chumash, and there's also a lot of people, once you start psychologizing everything, and sometimes that turns into psychobabble, and there's a lot of unflattering or even hard to substantiate analyses of what the avot are, and sometimes you have this transplants, anachronistic transplanting of certain themes in marriages that you'll have in the 20th, 21st century, trying to say that if only Avram had spent a few more days, at Yishmael's Little League games, and maybe Yishmael wouldn't have turned out like he was, or if Avram and Sarah had a date night every week, those kinds of things do diminish the character, because on the one hand you don't want them to be too lofty that you can't reach. On the other hand, these are people who founded the religion. This is the basis of Chumash. Somewhere between those two is where we have to try to strike things. Now, if you take a look then at Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, who was amongst a long line of other Mefarshim who did not accept Rav Kotler's approach. And Rav Kotler's approach is an approach you'll find within some midrashim. You'll find this approach amongst some mefarshim, but generally the approach that Rav Shamshon Fal Hirsch takes is a much more, I think, mainstream approach. I'll show you in a second, which is, I'll read for you what he says. This also is a translation from the Yiddish, from the German, excuse me. His Perush on Chumash was written in German. So the Torah never presents our great men as being perfect. It deifies no man, says of none, here you have the ideal, and this man, the divine, became human. Altogether, it puts the life of no man before us as the pattern out of which we are to learn what is right and good and what we have to do, what to refrain from doing. Where the word of God would set a pattern before us to imitate, it places no man born of dust. There God says, look at me, imitate me, wander in my ways. We are never to say, this must be right, for did not so-and-so do it? There was no collection of examples of saints. It relates what occurred, not because it is exemplary, because it did occur. Here you go, Jim. So that's an approach, which is to say that you can learn from the other. I mean, we'll assume that the Torah is going to present, as Rav Hirsch says, plenty of, they were real people with warts and all, and this is their lives, and we have to learn from them. And I guess this is saying pretty much what Seema was saying, that you can learn from people who are fallible. You can't learn from people who are so lofty. Now, you also point out, and it's interesting, he is saying a little bit more extreme, though, I think. It sounds like he's saying there are some things you actually don't learn from. Because you don't have to assume that every single thing the other did was right. Some things you might look at and say, like, oh, there may have been a mistake. And in fact, he's building on, if you turn to the next page, this is, I just want to show you two Rambans, which are, I think, pretty interesting. Two Rambans. The Ramban here is talking about, in the first episode, first thing I quoted for you, the Ramban is talking about the very point that you made, it was raised earlier, about Abraham going to Mitzrayim and saying that Sarah was his sister. Okay. The Ramban, who's, I'm pretty sure, of course, Rav Aaron Kotler would not, challenge his credentials, his bona fides. The Ramban says, and read the Hebrew, that's my English translation there, this was, again, done in the park yesterday. Vidaki Avram Avinu chata chet gadol bishkaga shehevi ishto at sadekas b'michshol avon yivnei pachdo pen yargu. Note, our forefather Abraham sinned a great sin unintentionally, made a mistake by bringing his wife into this situation. So he was feared for his own death. Hayalo liftach b'Shem. Should have relied on God. God could have saved him, and he has a lot of emunah. He's already shown this. He's shown this multiple times. Also, the very fact that he left Israel. Keep in mind, he's been told, go to Israel and stay there. In fact, the times got tough, and he left and went to Egypt. That itself is a mistake. Look what he says. Gam yitziato min haaretz shenitztaveh aleha b'tchila mipnei harav avona asher chata. That was a chait. It was a problem. He shouldn't have done that. It was a terrible thing. Ki Elokim b'rav yipadenu mimavet. God will take care. He should have had emunah. But listen, this is not just that he made a mistake. The Ramban understands that this was a historical mistake, a mistake of colossal consequences. V'al ma'aseh hazeh nigzar al zar'o al galut be'eretz Mitzrayim biyad par. Because of what Abraham did, showed a lack of faith by leaving Israel and going down to Egypt, his great-grandchildren were going to suffer the consequences of that. They were going to become enslaved in Egypt. In other words, not only did Abraham make a mistake here, his mistake here was going to reverberate for the generations. Now, he's referring here to the fact that Abraham did something that was a big mistake. This is not something that, I think that we would say, clearly he's not of the position that Avram was an angel, Avram didn't make any mistakes, and they're the spiritual lofty. He should have had more emun. The Ramban is actually accusing Avram of having a weakness in his faith. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, is any other Mepharshim supporting the opinion?
The Radak says the same. The Radak says similar. A couple other Mepharshim would say similar to the Ramban. Yeah, a couple other Mepharshim is similar to the Ramban. Rashi doesn't. Rashi says that this was the right thing to do. They're definitely going to find different Mepharshim to look at it differently. Honestly, it's an interesting. This Ramban in the vacuum is like an interesting Ramban. I mean, wouldn't necessarily have thought there was necessarily a chait to go to Mitzrayim. In fact, if Avram was starving, it could be an understandable thing to go seek out food. But the point that the first point he makes about claiming that Sarah was his sister, Ramban says that was inexcusable. Now, interesting. I'll take another Ramban. Ramban does this a few times. And then this is Ramban is the type of approach which gives somebody like Rav Hirsch, we saw in the 1800s, license to build upon very reputable sources to say that it's not necessary for us to assume that the avot are presenting something that is infallible, perfect, and absolute, and always holy. This next one is also very interesting, I think. Later on in Bereshit, after Abraham and Sarah had been in Egypt, in that episode that was referred to above, so you have is the story where Sarah does not yet have any children, and so what happens is Sarah gives her shifcha, her maidservant, to Avram. So Avram now is fathered a child with Hagar, son is Ishmael. Hagar in the story sort of seems to taunt or make Sarah feel like she's not so not a good wife, not a good mother, or whatever it is that she's taunting her about. Sarah is threatened by it, and Sarah tells Avram, and Sarah treats her harshly. Torah doesn't specify specifically what it is that Sarah did. It says, I think she afflicted him, she afflicted her and tormented her. Sarah tormented Hagar. And at that point, Vativrach, I think Hagar mipaneh. Hagar ran away at that point. Okay? And at that point, once Hagar runs away, so the angel tells Hagar to go back. Excuse me, I missed one part of the story. I think I'm relating it. She did not yet have Yishmael at this point. Notice she had given She had given Hagar to Avram. At this point, she's taunting Sarah. I'm gonna look it up. Get me the exact details on that, please, Lisa. I think she's pregnant at this point, but not a baby. At which point when she runs away and she's crying in the desert, a malach appears to her and says, "You're going to have a son. You're going to name Yishmael. He's going to be a para Adam, and you're going to have a good life." Okay. But the bottom line is, at this point, she had. Did I get the details right there? Was she pregnant when she left the house, or was she just, or she had only been just given to Abraham as the maidservant? Was she already pregnant or no?
Yeah, so she was pregnant and she started.
Okay, so bottom line is, Hagar is now being afflicted at the hands of Sarah. What's the Ramban say about that? This is a wild line, I thought. Wild for two reasons. Sarah made a chait. She sinned by treating Hagar harshly. Avram also, maybe my typo, I'm not sure. Avram also made a mistake by allowing her to afflict Hagar. How do you know this? Says the Ramban. V'shama Hashem el Anya. Hashem listened to the situation here. V'natan la ben, and gave her a son. Interestingly, the pasuk says that Yishmael is going to be a para Adam. Para Adam is hard to understand what exactly that means. Wild man. I think some of the Mepharshim say a para is like a wild donkey. Like I said, some of the Englishes will translations of will refer to will give you a son who will be a wild ass of a man is the translation, right? Para Adam. So it's a fun. If you look at it though, it's a funny sort of bracha. If you look at the psukim, Hagar is promised by God, I'm going to take care of you. You're going to have a son. Everything's going to be good, and your son's going to be a para Adam. What? You'll be a chai. But that's not the great. I mean, happy to have a son or anything like that. It's not the greatest bracha. So it's interesting. Some Mefarshim suggest on that para Adam that it actually means something good. Para Adam means, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think the Chizkuni says on para Adam that it means that he's going to be a wild man, meaning he's not going to have a 9-to-5 job. He's going to be somebody who's going to make his living by being a merchant, by being a salesman. He's going to go around the world. He's not going to be constrained in doing just like being in the box. He's going to be an innovator. A para Adam. The Ramban doesn't say it. The Ramban thinks he's going to be a wild man. He's going to be a fierce wild man. Why is that? Well, how does that fit into the story? Look what the Ramban says. La'anot zera Avraham b'sar b'chol minei inui. Yishmael, and again, the Ramban is living in a time when he himself experienced some of this. The Arab nations coming from Yishmael are going to make life tough for Abraham's children because Abraham and Sarah treated Hagar poorly. Wild. Right? It's a wild statement for two reasons. One, first of all, he's attributing the chait to both Abraham and Sarah, and the retribution, the payback for it, is conflict in the Middle East. The Ramban is saying is you trace it back to a chait that Abraham and Sarah, the way they treated Hagar. You realize the cosmic results of some of the actions of the Avot, which is where the Ramban's coming from. The Ramban is a firm believer in this idea of Maaseh Avot, Siman Labanim, that the lives of the Avot are, and this is actually interesting. On the one hand, it's very real. They make mistakes. They sin. On the other hand, there's something that's very cosmic and grand about it because their actions reverberate through history. And I think the Ramban will tell you that the power in the Avot is not necessarily that every action that they did was perfect, but that every action they did was of great significance. And when you look at that and how their actions influence history, that's something to look at with inspiration, admiration, to be wowed by the extent to which what they did had consequences that lasted forever. That's the idea of Maaseh Avot, Siman Labanim. Now, I'll present these two approaches as opposites of each other to a certain extent. We had Rabbi Aaron Kotler, and also again, it's not a totally modern approach. The Midrashim will speak about those. There's also anytime it looks like you find mistakes or chataim that people seem to have done. Often Midrashim will sort of explain that you're misinterpreting it. The idea of this comes up often. Some of you are familiar with even like later in Navi. You have the story of David and Bathsheba. So the Gemara will say, "Kol Omer David Chata Edo Elatoed," that it looks like David and Bathsheba. David may have been a little bit aggressive in his pursuit of Bathsheba, maybe inappropriate. But you're misinterpreting the story. You have the same kind of thing that will happen when it looks like Reuven, later in Sefer Breshit, seems to have done something that was not so appropriate with one of his father's wives. Again, that the Gemara also the Kol Omer Reuven Chata Eino Elatoa, that's a mistake. And there are Gemaras that point that say this and say that when we're looking at people of greatness, when it's said that when it refers sometimes to a chait that they perform, that's because people of high stature are being held to a very, very high standard, and what may look to us, the way it's presented to us, as a great sin. In reality, when you're talking to somebody who's at such a high standard, actually what they were doing was something that was much more minor than what it seemed to be. It was only presented as such in the way we don't relate to it. So that Rav Kroll is building on. There's the other approach that Ramban is talking about, that a lot of also have midrashim that don't shy away from pointing out flaws and mistakes that the Avot had, and that was what First was building upon. If you ask me again, I want to take a look. I want to shift to my third approach in just a second by highlighting something that again I'd said it before, Rabbi J.J. Schachter, in that article on morality of patriarchs. I want to read for you one thing that he points out. It says it is one thing to arrive at one's own conclusion on this issue. He's talking here about the extent to which you interpret the Avot's actions as being understood as sin-free or sometimes with mistakes. It's one thing to arrive at one's own conclusion on this issue. Maybe something else to determine how to present those conclusions in class, where clearly, for example, grade level must be a major consideration. What is appropriate in 11th grade is surely not appropriate in 4th grade. As I would suggest, the ultimate goal of yeshiva education is to produce young men and women who love Judaism and are inspired to maintain a lifelong commitment to our Masorah, or Jewish tradition, and great thought must be given to how to present apparent patriarchal imperfections to students. It's totally right. I was like, when I teach this, when I say this Ramban in 3rd grade, I don't think so. There are arguments to be made for it, but there is something that's I think right and good when you're when you're in the younger grades to have everything be peachy, rosy, whatever kind of other adjective you want to give it. That there's something that's right about that, because we don't expect younger students to think too overly critically or to have a more sophisticated understanding of this. I think the Ramban's approach here is much more sophisticated sort of understanding, and so I think you have to think, about what age students you want to introduce us to. But when you do it, my position would be, once you figure out the right age to introduce it to, in my opinion, it not only answers questions that kids would have, it makes you feel so much more, I feel, accepting, embracing of it. In other words, sometimes you don't, I find that it happens very often. We live in such a, I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, it just is. There really is very little element in our society of holding people up on a pedestal. Right? It's like maybe you want to put the blame at President Clinton, or you want to put the blame at you go back further to Kennedy. But at some point, we don't treat leaders of in our society with reverence. That's part of really living in a democratic society. It's the ultimate result of living in a fully democratic culture, is which everyone's kind of equal. Now, there's something that's negative about that. Don't get me wrong. There's something that we should strive towards recognizing, that some people can serve as role models and people to aspire to, and really to hold up as ideals. Any time you have somebody who you think is that ideal, then you find out the latest scandal about them, it's always like crestfallen. You always look for somebody who can be that, and sometimes you keep getting burned. I happened to be talking. I remember a couple of years ago, I was so enamored by the success of Matisyahu in popular culture. This is a guy, he's got I went to a concert of his in Brooklyn a couple of years ago, and there's a guy, it was on Hanukkah, he lit menorah. I'm looking in the audience, there is several frum people in this concert, but I took a few students with me at the time, several frum people in the audience, but you also had lots of guys with plenty of piercings, and I'm sitting in this audience, and I'm looking at this guy. He's got his beard, he's got his yarmulke on, and he's singing about "We Want Mashiach Now" in a rap song. And you've got a couple thousand people chanting "We Want Mashiach Now." I'm like, this is an incredible thing. Can you imagine somebody with the power to influence like large groups of people in a respected way, who holds by his tradition. Now he's not, like, then he decided a couple years ago to be a little bit, less frum than he is, and he was not as, I felt at that point like, oh, another guy who was holed up on a pedestal, who was so, such a, at a certain level was a good role model for something for kids to aspire to. It was taken down. You had it again. It happens over and over again with presidents of the United States. Never seem to be exactly what we're looking for in a hero. But sometimes you have who are heroes? Do we have heroes? Like who's somebody who's like people aspire? What's the answer to that question? Is there anybody who's like?
There's 2 rabbis in Israel.
Yeah.
Kanievsky.
Yeah, there's some rabbis. Yeah, rabbi. Listen, I think sometimes rabbis in Israel, but you know what? For all the rabbis in Israel we have, when you have another rabbi who's thrown in jail for money laundering, it takes him all. It takes. I feel like I get. I feel bad running in the crowd of rabbis sometimes. Another guy gets thrown in jail for money laundering. Another guy gets thrown in jail for molesting somebody. What's going on? I don't know. It seems like there's. I think that, I mention this because I think that our kids are understandably trained, not like trained, but we're trying to train, but just by living in the culture we live in, to be very skeptical of people who are infallible and held up on pedestals. What's that?
It's too good to be true, it usually is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it was probably always like that, but people just didn't
People
know
find
about
out more
it.
stuff
We
now.
find out now, that's the difference.
Yeah.
You don't think that the Rabbi were getting that same kind
Yeah,
of trouble
probably.
before?
Also,
Or the same, they weren't getting
I
in
think
trouble.
I
They were more,
remember when I first, I remember speaking to, when I was in high school, I was talking to an older man. I'm not sure why this story resonated with me. I'm not sure, I was talking to an older man. He was the grandfather of a friend of mine who was telling me, he was like talking about it was like one of these older, wiser guys who was talking about his experience growing up in America and what things were like. He talked about how he cried when he found out that John F. Kennedy was not faithful to Jackie. He cried. So
I was devastated by John Edwards. I never thought he could do that to a sick wife.
Yeah.
Devastated.
Devastated, right? He seemed like a great.
I said it wasn't true till the end. I said it
Yeah.
couldn't be true.
Right.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
It might be a little bit irrelevant,
Sure.
but in pop culture, for instance, all these people, Lance Armstrong, Paula Dean, from the
Right.
cooking, they make mistakes, whatever. They don't accept responsibility and they don't say, I'm sorry.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest things. I don't know if
100%.
President Clinton ever said, I'm sorry. I think
No.
he kept smiling.
No, I
I don't
think
know.
I'm
but-
smiling. It all
Right.
depends what the meaning of the word is.
he just redefined it, he just redefined everything.
So in the process of this, of, great people who influence and inspire whatever, not being perfect, it's okay. But how is
Let me
that
shut.
applied
I
here?
couldn't have asked for a better. It's almost like I planted you in here to go to my third approach. Perfect. So let me show you my third approach. My third approach. Get me back on track. Thank you. My third approach, which is again, coming for a full circle to develop. It's something that I had learned when I was in this Rabbi David Sykes's course, and I was in YU. He wrote his dissertation. He published it. He didn't publish. It's an unpublished dissertation. 1985 at Revel at YU's graduate school. He wrote a dissertation called Patterns in Genesis. Okay, what his basic claim was, and it's phenomenal, and I think it's very true. And you have a. I'm going to share with you one of the things at the bottom of the page now. I'm going to share with you one of the things that he taught us at the time. I'm going to share this with you. His basic approach was to say the following. Again, and he introduced it in the context of often you will have in the you have Christians who will sometimes look at the Bible, at the Old Testament, and they're going to say that's an Old Testament sort of behavior, which is the dishonest, the trickery, the ultra emphasis on letters, on the performance of actions and halacha, but not on the ideal and love and spirit. And that a lot of times you'll have these characters or people, that was the old That was the old style. The new style is what we have in the New Testament, and because the Bible is presenting something that was okay for that time, but it's not something that's of high moral character. So what he said is that you got it all wrong. Rabbi Sykes' position, this idea that he's developing patterns in Genesis, and he based it on Midrashim that he connects to this also. Some of Farshim point this out, that you shouldn't look at the episode itself and decide that this is a presentation or endorsement of the Torah's endorsement of a particular person's behavior. You have to look at the whole pattern of the story. And that you'll see is that if indeed somebody behaves poorly in Chumash and they get paid back for it, and the Torah is clearly trying to show us that, and that there is perhaps regret, or maybe there's not regret, there's a learning of a lesson, then what the Torah is doing is something incredible, which is to say that people make mistakes. There are consequences to your actions, and the Torah is saying that that's how morality works. That people can sometimes do something wrong, but they have to understand that there are consequences to their actions. What Torah is then endorsing is not a particular behavior. You got to look at the big picture. Let me illustrate that with one example, which when I learned this, like, knocked my socks off. That was great. You look at one of the episodes we talked about as being, having some difficulty, was the story of Yaakov getting the bracha from his father, pretending he was Esau. It's a funny story. You have to admit, it's a funny story. You do have Yaakov and his mom, right? You have Yaakov and Rivka are conspiring, for lack of a better word, to figure out how to trick Yitzchak into giving the bracha to Yaakov instead of giving it to Esau. When you read the story, it's not the type of thing that on its simple pshat level you're going to say, that you're holding up in your. I don't know how you actually tell it. I don't know how you teach the story in the third grade class when you. I should probably listen when the kids had parsha class. They come back to teach me read their parsha sheets. Probably would have a good way of presenting it. It's hard to present this story on the pshat level. I guess in certain midrashim when that talk about some of the responses when Yaakov responds when Yitzchak says, "Are you Yaakov or Esau?" He says, "Anochi." But he says, "Esau b'chorecha." Okay, that I'm not sure how satisfying of an answer that is. When the Medrash says, Rashi cites the Medrash, that Yaakov wasn't technically lying because he said when Yitzchak said to him, "Are you Esau or Yaakov?" And Yaakov responded, "Anochi." He responded, "Anochi Esau b'chorecha," which literally means, "I am Esau, your eldest." So the Medrash says, well, you have to understand the punctuation is off. It meant, "Are you Esau or Yaakov?" "Anochi, I am I." Period. Esau is b'chorecha. Esau is your oldest son. Now, again, it's hard to say that's but that's what the Torah was trying to tell us, frankly. I could have an approach as what the Medrash might be trying to say there, but how do you understand the whole story? I'm not sure you tell it to a third grader. I don't really know the answer to that question. It's tough. I don't want to tell a third grader that it's okay to trick people.
Your parents or what?
Is it okay to do that? And then you're supposed to. How do you give the message in the right way? So I want to share with you what he something brilliant that Sykes developed. I think it makes so much sense. Nechama Leibowitz also has a similar kind of thing in one of her approaches on this parsha. So think about see this chart I have there at the bottom. Let's look at the chart side by side. On the left side of things Yaakov did, Yaakov's actions. 1, Yaakov tricks his blind father into thinking the younger sibling is the older. So look at Yaakov's life. Look at the big picture of Yaakov's life. Anything happens in Yaakov's life that seems similar to that? Is there a certain payback that Yaakov is getting? Look at the patterns. So on the other side, on the other column, I said, Yaakov cannot see and is tricked into thinking the older sibling is the younger one. When does that happen? Menashe and Ephraim is even later on. Before Menashe and Ephraim. When does he himself get really tricked? Rachel and Leah. Think about it. Yaakov pretended he was the older son, right, to get something from his father Yitzchak. Years later, Yaakov thinks he's going to be marrying the younger sister, right? Finds out, wakes up in the morning, oh my God, that's not the younger sister, that's the older sister. Okay, number one. So that's one thing. Now, it's not just the theme, there's also linguistic connections between them. Again, if it's only the theme, sometimes you might say it's coincidental, it might be similar things may come in a lot of different places, but if there's something linguistic, if there's something in the words that draws our attention to it, then you know you're on sturdier ground. For example, the word, the shoresh resh mem yud, which means to deceive or to trick, appears only 3 times in Sefer Bereshit. Okay? The 3 times it appears, one of them, the first time it appears, is when Yitzchak responds to Esav and says, it's the second thing in the second row in the first column. Perek Kav Zayin Pasuk Lamed Hey. I only have the Hebrew there. Vayomer ba achicha b'mirma vayikach birchatecha. Says to Esav, when Esav comes back, he says, what happened? Where's the bracha? And Yitzchak says, ba achicha b'mirma. Your brother came stealthily with trickery and took your bracha. Okay. In fact, look at that story. The next story happened in Yaakov's life where Yaakov was tricked. Look what the pasuk says. Perek Kaftet pasuk Kaf Hey in the second column. Vayiba boker, woke up in the morning. V'hinehi leah. He's startled and realizes that the woman he married is not the woman he thought he was marrying. It's not Rachel, it's Leah. Vayomer al Lavan. Mazor asitali. What did you do to me? Halo barachel avarti imach. Didn't I work for Rachel? 7 years. Vilama rimitani. Why did you trick me? So when the Torah presents the mirma, lama rimitani, what might be happening here is the Torah is drawing our attention. It only uses the word, again, if the word, I'm not saying the word vayomer appears in both stories, right? Right? Because vayomer happens a lot of times. But when you have words that appear only, again, 3 times in all of Sefer Bereshit, the Torah is trying to draw our attention to a connection between these 2 episodes. Did I put down the third? You know what the third time is? Did I put it in here?
You were in France.
No. You oh, I did throw a third one in there. If you go to the second to last one, the other time it appears, and Sykes wanted to say that this also fits in. It's not as strong. I'll do it when I get down there at the end. Okay. But looking at this, continuing in the story here, what is Lavan's response to Yaakov's question of Lama Ritani? Why did you trick me? It's a funny response. Vayomer Lavan, lo ye'asechen bimkomeinu, latet tzira lifnei bechira. Around here, we don't do that thing where younger people get what the older person's supposed to get. Around here? What do you mean around here? What does it mean around here? Being coming? So give the response. So there's, I'm not saying that Lavan himself was trying to, but the way the Torah presents it is, it's a response. It's a response to what happened with Yaakov. So there are 2 things I'm saying. It's not just a theme. It's also the words of the Torah are drawing our attention in these 2 ways. On the one hand, Lama Ramitani to Bachicha B'mirma, and also the second thing of Lo Yasechen Bim Komeinu. Around here, we don't do. That's to contrast with around there, you, Yaakov, when you did do it. I'll show you a couple other thematic patterns that Sykes pointed out as well. Yaakov deceived his father using the skin of a goat and Esav's clothes. Yaakov himself is deceived by his sons using the blood of the goat and Yosef's clothes. Is that pure chance, pure coincidence? I don't think so. In other words, think what happened. Yaakov is now mourning his son Yosef, and the way he is being deceived. And this is the person who acted in a deceitful way towards his father. His children are now deceiving him using similar tactics that were involved in his act of deception. Right? He put the goat skin on his arms, pretending he was Esav. They took the blood of a goat and put it on the Ketonet Pasim, the coat of many colors, and presented it to Yaakov. And Yaakov suffered because of that. Okay? Interesting. The next thing I have in there, what was the bracha that Yaakov received? The bracha that Yaakov received, originally, the first bracha that Yaakov got from Yitzchak, that whether you might say that if it seems that Yitzchak was meant to give it to Esav, was that Yavducha Amim, Vishtachavu Lecha Leumim, have a Gvir La'achicha, Ve'yishtachavu Lecha B'nei Imecha. You're going to be in charge. Your siblings, your family is going to be subservient to you. When Yaakov and Esav met up again, right? When Yaakov and Esav meet up again, the psukim are, non-stop in their description of the way in which Yaakov presented himself as being subservient to Esav. The number of times, I think it refers to his Esav, I think 7 times in the psukim as Adoni Esav, my master Esav, right? Yavorna Adoni lifnei avdo. Yaakov says that, may my master pass in front of me, your servant. This is payback of a sort. In other words, you were supposed, wait a second, I thought you got the bracha that you were the one in charge of your brother. The next time you see your brother, you're saying your brother's in charge and you're the Eved? The last 2 things I was going to point out are the third time the word mirma or rama'ut comes up. Vayanu b'nei Yaakov et Shechem et Chamor Aviv b'mirma vayidaberu asher timei et dina achuta. Now this is the story of the other thing of other episode of deceit, that took place in Breshit was when Shimon and Levi conspired to kill all the inhabitants of Shechem when their sister Dinah had been kidnapped and raped, and they said, everyone's going to have to get a bris, and then we'll make a deal. And then whenever they had the bris, and the men weren't able to fight, they went out and killed everybody. So what Professor Sykes had said at the time was that, again, this is not the best of connections, but I put it in anyways. It's worth taking a look at. He says Yaakov suffers in this situation. Yaakov is at the end of the story when Shimon and Levi wiped out the town. Yaakov chastises them. He says we're going to be put on the defensive now. Everyone's going to think we're murderers and we're going to have a rough life. Again, another situation. Yaakov himself suffered because of deceptive tactics of his children. And the last thing I wanted to point out was that, the last thing I have this, I've mentioned that Yaakov concealed his identity from his father, pretending to be somebody else. And at the end, Yosef again. Yosef deceives Yaakov and his family by pretending to be somebody else. So if you take a look at the pattern, this was the title of this guy's dissertation, patterns in Genesis. If you look at the big picture, then what you see is not a presentation of something that's, the particular actions themselves are either lofty things to live by, or you shouldn't look at the things themselves as something to be critical of and to say the lesson learned is that the Avot are engaged in deceptive practices. You gotta look at the Torah's messages. What is the Torah's message? The Torah's message through its presentation here seems to be that Yaakov made a mistake, Yaakov erred. If it wasn't that, then why does Yaakov keep getting paid back? Why does Yaakov keep getting deceived? Why is he mess up and not get the right wife? Why does that happen to him? Why is it that Yosef is deceiving? All of these patterns seem to be much more than coincidental. It's an authentic reading of what the Torah's message is, in my opinion, to say that the Torah itself is critical of what Yaakov is doing. Again, it's critical, saying that sometimes people make these mistakes, and then you have to learn from the mistakes, and ultimately, the idea is, this was like, this was what the kind of the kunst of what Professor Sykes' whole thing was, that once you have imperfections, every imperfection, every flaw, every mistake has a midah keneged midah, and you have to find where it is, and the Torah is presented, and then once that's been corrected, then you can go further. In other words, once this has been addressed, and it's been addressed, Yaakov, let's say, has learned his lesson, and then the Jewish people are able to go forward, and to progress. And this, to a certain extent, is similar to what we saw earlier in the Ramban of Maaseh Avot Simon Laban. It's a different angle of Maaseh Avot Simon Laban. Means the actions of the Avot have, cosmic consequences that are much bigger than they might be for you and I, and that Hashem is going to make sure that they're addressed in order for us to continue to progress. Yeah, Bonnie.
So this is not new to us because our teacher Lisa, has done this before. My question with high school students, how do you bring it back around and say the Avot grew from their mistakes? They rectified them. Because it's not explicit.
Well, so I think
but we saw the greatness that they
so one thing I think I would say, for example, if you look at Yaakov, so you do have, you're going to develop this right here, right now, but you also have the idea of when the Torah says that Yaakov's name was switched from Yaakov to Yisrael. So the Torah itself is saying that Yaakov was a transformed person, and it says that specifically is the reason why his name was changed. I'm not sure what would I say with the Ramban saying that Abraham and Sarah may have sinned there with Hagar. What would I say about that? Well, I might say this. Listen, the Ramban, I would present it as I'll tell you how I did present. I would present it as a couple different approaches here. I want to be perfectly honest. It's easy to do with high school kids than it's to do with elementary school. I don't know how you take. That's why I'm in high school. I don't know how to do this in elementary school. But in high school kids, I'm fine presenting it as like that. Here is the Ramban's interpretation of what of how we saw Av. The other people are going to interpret it as that Hagar deserved it. Hagar was taunting Sarah, and she deserved to be banished. And to the extent that, if you ask me, the psukim themselves don't support, in my humble opinion, the Ramban's approach by Hagar, and because the psukim themselves, the Malach appears to Hagar and says, "Go back to Sarah, and you should go back and be under her servitude." So the psukim do seem to be, in that situation, if you ask me, seem to be, authorizing Avram and Sarah's approach. But I would present both. I would present both like that. Yeah.
How would you explain that, except the fact that Avram is actually upset by Sarah sending away Hagar? But what does Hashem say to him? Shema b'kolah.
Shema b'kolah.
So now he's accepting this. In other words, it comes from a higher level to say, no.
Yeah, that's when he sends Yishmael and Sarah.
So,
yeah, it's a similar thing, but in this story, you have. I think it is similar though, because in this story, this is before Yishmael is born. The fact of the matter is, the psukim say that they're not when the Malach appears to Hagar, he's not on the one hand, he's sympathetic to Hagar. He says that you're going to have a child who's going to be a para Adam, which is not I'm not sure what the bracha of that is necessarily. But he also says, go back to Sarah. Sarah's right. So there is something
But
to
that's
that.
in direct contrast to Yehuda, who does apologize and admit.
Correct. 100%. 100%. Yeah.
I just want to just bring in another thing is if you teach the high school kids, so it's not only about the faults of the forefathers, it's also about the merits.
100%.
One thing that they do good, like how it influences in the future, and you can see that.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it again, and I'm cautious. I don't want to get into what we said originally that if Avram had only spent a little more time at, you know, going to parent-teacher conferences with Ishmael's school, things like that. And that's, I think we need to hold them up as spiritual titans in defining, we're here today because of, the world is a tremendous place because of that.
The world is the world.
Yeah, no, this is like, we have to keep that as the prime, but what do you do when you look at this? You have to say like, oh, it doesn't mean what it said? Or can you look at it and actually try to learn something that's positive from it? So that's my approach. Yeah, Dina.
There's one thing I just wanna say was, I think when you're talking about obviously a third grade kid, you teach it different than a 10th or 11th grade kid. I think what's important, and I've seen with my own kids, is when that
Yeah.
quantum leap is made, and certain kids develop intellectually at different stages,
Mhm.
and that can
It's very hard.
cause,
It's very hard.
that can cause issues, because when one kid is not ready to hear
100%.
till 9th grade, someone else needs to
That's
hear
right.
7th, and that can cause
It's very,
cognitive dissonance.
it's complex.
I mean, that really
Yeah,
can.
I think you're right, that is the challenge. I agree with that. Okay, thank you all very much. We'll be in touch with everybody for, let you know what's going on with whether next week, we're gonna have, whether we're going to or not do next week, whether we'll skip a week. We'll see. Thank you very much, everybody.
Rabbi.